Come forward at this point in time, the children, so they get a chance to meet Rabbi Michael. You guys ready? I see a couple kids back there. Come on forward. We usually sit up here. Rabbi, there's a nice built-in seat. This is not traditional, but it works. Might have to get a microphone? Yeah, thanks. Jackson, Jenna, Jonah, good morning. I've got a question for you. Did you get your shot? Is that what that's from? No. What's that from? Just fell? Okay. I got my shot this week, so I was wondering. Cub Scouts at 11. What are you doing at 11? You're coming with? You're a Cub Scout too? Boy, I hope enough people to help out. Is everyone going to Cub Scouts at 11? Because we've got a packing event to do after this, you know, right? Have you guys ever met Rabbi Michael before? Cub Scouts too? Have you met Rabbi Michael before, though? He's not, but he's going to be. This is Rabbi Michael. This is what I'm trying to do here.
Hi, guys.
Jackson, Rabbi Michael. Jenna.
Nice to meet you, Jackson.
Rabbi Michael. Jonah.
Jenna and Jonah, nice to meet you.
So it's a very special day when I get, well, wait till you hear their parents' names, by the way.
Also Jace?
That's correct. Yep. This is a very special day when we get to be joined by a rabbi in worship, isn't it? Kind of unusual. Do you know why he's here today? You don't? For a long time, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, through a group called the Manna Project, have been doing, what would you say we've been doing, Rabbi?
We've been doing what Manna is all about, trying to feed those who are hungry.
Right. Yep.
Trying to help out people who need help.
And I'm going to tell you a piece of bad news right now. There's actually a lot of people who are really hungry right now. And there's more this year than there was last year, and there was more last year than there was the year before. And it's mostly because of some of the stuff like with the COVID things that have been happening, but it's kind of concerning for us. I mean, homeless, and sometimes even people who have homes aren't finding enough food. So, which I can't even imagine. I haven't gone longer than a couple of, could be because homes are really expensive. That's a very good insight, Jackson. So this is stuff we've all got to do something about, don't you think?
Absolutely. That's why we're here today.
Absolutely. So I wish you could help us pack up these bags at 11, but you'll be in Cub Scouts, but there will be other ways to help out. You're staying? Thank you, Jenna. Awesome. Okay. So Jenna's in charge starting at 11 o'clock. We've been looking for somebody to take the reins, and thankfully you're going to be here. You're going to have to fly home? Is it? Okay, we'll try to keep the service short, Jamie. Oh, it's Rocket Day at Cub Scouts. That actually is really tough competition. Next year, we can't schedule anything on Rocket Day for Cub Scouts. Okay, lesson learned. There will be other opportunities. We're doing this how many times?
4 times, I believe.
Yep, that's right. So because there's so much need, we can't just do one packing event anymore. We have to do 4. And I'm hoping you're going to catch us on the next one. But thanks for coming up today, okay? If anybody would you join me in prayer? O Lord, may the meditations of our hearts and the words of our mouths be acceptable to you. O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. Welcome and welcome. So good we can gather together again and do this Manna Project thing that I think has been really impactful and meaningful for years and years, and as we just said in the children's sermon, also is super necessary. One of the things that I think is interesting, especially for Christians to learn about Judaism, is that there is something called rabbinical Judaism, which is actually a little different than when we open up the Hebrew scriptures, or what we call our Old Testament. We look at it, we say, oh yeah, this is the story of the Jewish people. But really, rabbinical Judaism is almost exactly the same start date as Christianity in many ways, right? This is part of what's interesting for me about the Manna Project and about all the things that we do, is that we are looking forward. right? We're looking into the future and saying, what does a better future look like? But every single Sunday that we do our Christian thing, and every single Friday, and you guys have a lot more services than we do, you're also looking backwards, and we're looking backwards. We're opening up an ancient book, and we're trying to find things that are transcendental, things that never change as a way to guide us when we look forward. So we're very historically minded, both of our traditions, developmentally oriented and historically minded. This is a little anecdote for you. Do you know when the first time that ever in history there is the recorded word Christian? It's a little document, and it came out of the Roman Empire, and this document was a letter from one guy. He's a prefect, I think, in Cappadocia, which is a beautiful place in the world where there were lots of Jewish immigrants, lots of Christian converts from the pagan religions around there, and lots of Roman citizens. And so the guy who's in charge there writes back to Rome and says, I got a problem. There are these people living here, and they're growing this religion, and they're calling themselves Christians. And I don't know what to do about them, because obviously we don't want strange cults. Strange cults is a bad thing. But here's all that they're doing, is they're gathering together around a meal where they've invited all kinds of people, including and always the poorest people, and they're caring for them. And I don't know what to do about this. And to this very day, you'll experience here at church, we do our communion liturgy. That's what they're describing, is a meal that we gather together where everyone's invited. And from that flows all sorts of charitable acts. But I just think it's absolutely fascinating that even back then, the question of what do you do with people who are just doing a faith that is supposed to help was the apparent problem to be solved. And not much has changed in many ways, right? I think back to our Deuteronomy reading that I'm hoping you'll have a chance to riff on a little with me too. But it's not just that we've got this mission, and I think we in large part agree about what the values are that we would like to see in the world to come. But it's also how do you plan for it, right? Deuteronomy says, well, you gotta start building structures, don't you? You gotta start appointing people and giving them rules and giving them mandates and building even structures for what happens when the judges don't do what they're supposed to do, right? So that's kind of our question today, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's so interesting. In Judaism this week, we're beginning reading the Torah from the beginning. We read a section each week, and this week's Torah portion was Bereshit, the very beginning. And I was really struck knowing that we were going to be doing this morning, that what is it that God says we're supposed to do once we're in the Garden of Eden? I mean, besides, multiply and all this, God gives all the plants and the trees for food. God mentions it as the first thing, and to the animals, what you're going to eat. And so, when we're talking about early Christianity and Judaism for that matter too, being about serving and giving food to those who need. This is what we're trying to do all the time, which is imitate the ways of God. And I think that's what we're going to be doing as well this morning, and sort of riffing, like you said, off of the verses in Deuteronomy that you mentioned, right, which talks about justice. The world, we aim for a world of justice, but we also know that justice is balanced with compassion. So we have compassion as a motivator for us this morning in doing the work that we're going to be doing, feeding those who are hungry. Imitating the ways of God, which we're all aspiring to do, is yet another, I think, motivation. But then there's this issue of justice. So you want me to dive into that, or you want to?
Let's do it.
Okay. So Pastor, you mentioned rabbinic Judaism, and this is one of what you all read this morning from Deuteronomy, is really one of the best examples, I think, of what rabbinic Judaism tries to do. And I think probably the meeting point with Christianity as well. We read, you all just read, you shall establish judges and magistrates in each city, right? To make sure that justice is done. And this is kind of a procedural justice, right? You have to have courts. It talks about how you can't take bribes and how you have to make sure everyone has equality in the judgment in order to do real justice, right? And Judaism, added a bunch of these rules to them. So for example, in a traditional court, and I'm sure this is very similar in our courts as well. You can't have one of the parties standing up while the other one is sitting down, because the judges are likely to perceive them in different ways. And you have to make sure that that both parties involved are wearing similar kind of clothes, so that the judges aren't persuaded by appearances. Obviously, no bribes. There's no favoring the rich or the poor. There's no favoring the locals over the strangers. You have to go on the law. And then we read some of the most famous words, I think, in the entire biblical tradition. Tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, justice, justice you shall pursue. I believe the translation said justice, only justice, you shall pursue. Which is absolutely, and then we ask where's the compassion element? How do you balance these two? But we also interpret this as if you're striving for a goal of justice, to have just ends. The repetition of that word tzedek, justice, could also imply you have to have just means to get there. And I think this is partly as well what we're doing this morning. We want a society in which everyone is fed. And clearly, we're not achieving that goal in our society. And we should be examining, well, what are the structures that have led to this injustice? But we're here today to pack food, to try and use whatever means we can to make sure just ends are achieved. I want to also say that there's this procedural justice, which I was just mentioning, right? That you have to have the structures in place to make sure that justice is done. But there's also substantive justice. Are you achieving the goal? Are you achieving justice? And sometimes laws being what they are, and I think, in our society, we're all abiding by the law, and yet we have this injustice of inequality. So sometimes we have to go beyond the letter of the law. And I think that's what we're doing here today. We're going beyond what we have to do, quote unquote, to doing what we really have to do, which is to make sure that justice is achieved and people have food to eat. And I want to just say one last thing that as I begin with, this is sort of imitating the ways of God, right? This is about balancing justice and compassion, which we hope God is doing. We attribute God to be doing that. And this is also about love, which we also assume God is all about love, and we certainly hope God is all about love, and we sense that God is all about love, because this is also about v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, and you shall love your God. V'ahavta et hager, you shall love the stranger who dwells amongst you. And I just want to then, since you start talking about rabbinic Judaism, right? Give yet one example of just how extreme we can take this, right? So take one of the simplest things that happens every day. You find a lost object, right? So the just thing is you return it to the rightful owner, right? Well, also there's a whole chapter in the Talmud that discusses the simplest thing of how you return it to the right owner, because it raises questions. Well, the procedural justice is to return it, but how do you make that happen? What if more than one person comes forward and claims what it is that you found? What if no one comes to claim what it is that you found? What if it costs you money? If it's if you find someone's donkey or horse or something, you got to feed it until the owner's found. How much money do you have to put out on it? Or if you have to advertise that you found this, whatever it was that you found, how much money do you have to spend in order to do that? Is that fair to you to do that? So there's all sorts of questions that come up about how you go about doing it. And that's where I want to connect that as well to what we're doing this morning. How far do we have to go to make sure that our own community, there's this kind of basic equality that what you all read today in Deuteronomy is achieved? That there is not this grave injustice between the rich and the poor, between the haves and the have-nots. And at the end of the day, this is all about the interdependency of all of us, a sense of community and what that means. Because we all know we're so fond of saying about justice, if there's injustice anywhere, it's a threat to justice everywhere. Well, you know what? If there's inequality and there's hunger everywhere, there's inequality and the threat of hunger for all of us. So in order to achieve justice, we all have to be in the act doing justice. And I think that's what we're all about this morning.
That's great. And deep appreciation for your wisdom and learning. And also, no wonder your library is so big. If that level of specificity is dedicated to every rabbinical piece of study. But in deep appreciation for you coming here and for all of you for showing up today to help do this. I really, really appreciate it. One final thought that came out of what you're saying there too. When we do justice, the position that we are in, I think, also matters. One of the reasons why I started by talking about a time in which both Christians and Jews were living in a foreign empire with values foreign to them, with power that didn't centralize them. In many ways, because we had these parallel tracks, I can look with appreciation on the teachings of rabbinical Judaism and see the deep way in which you guys have engaged with this idea of justice. In many ways, Christians are now finding themselves again, and so are Jews finding themselves again, in a place where we're not necessarily in charge and where the values of the empire that we're around look foreign to us because they don't center our view of justice in its outcomes or in its means as where we are. So we began with a reading from Jeremiah, one of the prophets who proudly proclaimed that he was against the order as it stood. And we may find ourselves, even through the simplest event, is packing up a little brown bag that will have in it some necessities for a person who's been so marginalized that they've been forgotten essentially by society. But doing that downstairs after service might be a prophetic act. It might be an act of resistance, but it is one, I think, that our God is calling us into. And I am appreciative that all of you are on that journey with us and that you guys could be here today too. So thanks be to God for this gathering. Amen.